What will go down in the chronicles of this conflict as one of the most precise and devastating strikes of recent months took place today near Sumy region. A complex operation by Russian forces fell upon a battalion of the Ukrainian armed forces concentrated in field positions. 2 Abrams tanks, 4 Bradley infantry fighting vehicles, an ammunition depot, automotive and armored vehicles, all of this turned into piles of burning metal in a matter of minutes. Personnel losses totaled up to 50 men, and this is only the officially confirmed figure. But numbers never convey what you can see with your own eyes. After the strike, the field around the point of impact looked like scorched earth. The wreckage of equipment protruded from the ground like the bones of ancient monsters. Between them lay bodies that had never left their positions. Subscribe to stay up to date on every step of this war and understand what is really behind the words of official reports. The first reports of troop concentrations came days before the attack. An agent network operating behind enemy lines recorded the movement of personnel to an area that the Ukrainian command considered relatively safe. There, on a field, the Ukrainian armed forces were waiting for the rotation they had been promised back in early summer. But the rotation never came. Moreover, the situation in their ranks was critical. Some positions were held by only 1 or 2 men, at the limit of their strength, with no opportunity to change or rest. The command was trying to patch holes in the defense. In the 156th Independent Mechanized Brigade, a woman deputy battalion commander with the call sign Gaika was in charge of distributing people. Young, but already endowed with a high position, she tried to cover all the problem areas, sending soldiers on so-called business trips to the most difficult areas. This decision, paradoxically, played against the Ukrainian forces. It was the concentration of personnel and equipment in one place that made them an ideal target. When the information about the battalion's location, the composition of equipment, and the number of people was confirmed, the reconnaissance began to clarify the coordinates. The situation was such that the enemy was in a vulnerable position. Fatigue, lack of men, lack of shelter, and apparent dependence on a single supply hub. All this created the conditions for a strike that could completely collapse the unit's combat capability. At this point, on a different plane, there was also an information background going on. The President of the United States, Donald Trump, in an interview with an American TV channel, spoke sharply about Ukraine's prospects in the war. He called the question of whether Ukraine could defeat Russia stupid, and reminded that Russia had defeated both Hitler and Napoleon. These words spread across media space, causing resonance and becoming a kind of political echo of the coming strike. Meanwhile, in the headquarters were painstaking preparations. Air crews of Su-304 airplanes were bringing their machines to full combat readiness. Crews of Garand 500 unmanned aerial vehicles were checking guidance systems and ammunition. Electronic warfare specialists worked to completely eliminate the possibility of the Ukrainian forces transmitting an alert. Every action was part of one big mechanism that had to work at the perfect moment. The latest data check confirmed. 2 Abrams tanks, 4 Bradley infantry fighting vehicles, an ammunition depot, up to 10 other armored vehicles and armored vehicles, and up to 50 personnel fighters are on target. Coordinates were entered into the system, signals were coordinated, commanders took their places. Now everything depended on one command. And that command was given. At that moment, the operation ceased to be just dots on the map and figures in reports or solar. It became a reality that in a matter of minutes will change the balance of forces on this section of the front. Every successful strike on the front begins long before the first explosion. Behind this morning, when the silhouettes of airplanes and drones cut through the sky over Sumy region, there were weeks, if not months, of preparation. As early summer, operational reports received the first reports from the network of agents that the Ukrainian forces were regrouping in the rear. The sources noted the appearance of columns of equipment, including foreign-made, and the movement of personnel deep into the region. This data immediately aroused the interest of the headquarters. The information required verification. For this purpose, both ground observers and aerial reconnaissance were involved. Unmanned aerial vehicles conducted stealthy overflights at high altitudes, filming and analyzing every square meter of the suspected area. Cameras captured Abrams tanks and Bradley infantry fighting vehicles standing in temporary positions, as well as trucks carrying ammunition and fuel. All of these were scattered around storage hangars and fortified pads. Agent sources from inside Ukrainian armed forces units reported that the rotation of personnel was dragging on, fighters were getting tired, and the command was moving people from one point to another without being able to fully renew the forces. A woman with the call sign Gaika, the battalion's deputy commander, was actually distributing fighters by hand, filling gaps in the defense. This created nervousness and chaos, and thus increased the likelihood of error. Russian intelligence closely observed this picture. At the same time, work was underway to establish routes for ammunition and fuel. Tracking was conducted not only in the area of concentration, but also along the adjacent roads. This was necessary to block the escape and supply routes at the time of the attack. When it became clear that the enemy forces have densified in one area, the stage of target planning began. Maps with coordinates of targets were on the table of aviation commanders and drone operators. The decision was made. The strike should be comprehensive to eliminate any possibility of restoring the combat capability of the unit. For the realization of the operation were chosen crews of Su-34 planes armed with corrected aerial bombs UMPK-500. These bombs make it possible to hit targets with high accuracy, remaining out of range of most enemy air defenses. Their work was to be complemented by drones Guren 500, capable of attacking targets deep in the defense, striking ammunition depots and equipment. Special attention was paid to ensuring surprise. Several hours before the start of the operation, electronic warfare specialists had to suppress communication and data transmission channels in the attack area. This would have deprived the Ukrainian command of the opportunity to react in time to the approaching threat. In parallel, false information noises were created to distract attention and divert enemy forces away. The plan was detailed down to the last detail. Each participant in the operation knew his area of operation and the exact time of the beginning of the action. Air crews received photos of targets taken from drones a day before the strike, with priority kill zones marked. Drone operators knew which targets to destroy first to paralyze the battalion's ability to resist. The preparations were conducted in complete secrecy. Even among their own, many did not know exactly when the order would be given. Everything depended on weather conditions, enemy activity, and readiness of all units. But by nightfall it became clear. The window to strike opens in the morning. In the headquarters established silence, which is always preceded by great events. It was in these hours the operation took its final form. One red dot remained on the map, the area of concentration of a battalion of the armed forces of Ukraine, which in a few hours would cease to exist as a combat-ready unit. The morning in the Sumy region began unaccustomedly quiet. The wind barely touched the dry grass, the air was dense and motionless, as if the day itself was waiting for something inevitable. The enemy, who did not yet know that his battalion's hours were numbered, was doing the usual things. Someone was cleaning weapons, someone was smoking at the armored vehicle, a few soldiers were fiddling with fuel canisters. Only larks were buzzing above their heads, and no one heard what was already rising in the air tens of kilometers away from them. At the airbase, the crews of the Su-34 took their places in the cockpits. Each pilot's every step had been honed by training, checking instruments, exchanging short commands, taking off. The first engines hummed, gaining momentum, and the sounds began to cut through the morning silence. Simultaneously, on another section of the front, the Geranium 500 drones launched from their launchers. Their black silhouettes, almost indistinguishable against the sky, took a course to the point of impact. In the headquarters, watched every step. On the screens of operators came to life heat maps, marking the movement of equipment and people in the target area. The battalion of the armed forces of Ukraine did not yet know that it was being watched in real time, that every combat vehicle, every group of fighters was already in the crosshairs. The first stage of the strike began with the work of electronic warfare. In a matter of seconds, communication channels were suppressed, and Ukrainian operators trying to call the headquarters heard only crackling in their headphones. From that moment on, their position became defenseless. The Su-34 entered the designated corridor. The pilots saw beneath them a mosaic canvas of fields, among which black and olive-colored silhouettes of vehicles stood on the point marked out by the coordinates. The first target was 2 Abrams tanks, placed side by side near the temporary hangars. From above, they looked almost toy-like, but in a few seconds each vehicle became the center of a fireball. UMPK 500's guided bombs penetrated the armor and blew up the internal ammunition packs. One tank was torn apart, the other caught fire, throwing out black columns of smoke. Almost simultaneously, drones hit the target. The Geranium 500 attacked the ammunition depot and the armored vehicle parking lot. The explosion at the warehouse was so powerful that flames soared above the trees and shrapnel flew hundreds of meters. Several Bradley vehicles parked nearby were caught in the blast zone. Their sides were punctured and their crews were killed. The infantry in the vicinity tried to take cover in the trenches, but the next series of blows hit these very positions. The ground shook, throwing up fountains of dust and debris. Those who survived the first blasts were stunned and disoriented. 5 minutes from the start of the attack, the staging area looked like blazing chaos. Fire was devouring armored vehicles. Ammunition continued to detonate with deafening pops. Men who a moment ago had been holding weapons now lay motionless among the wreckage. Gradually, the Air Force withdrew to return, and the drones, having finished their work, transmitted the last images to the command post. They showed that there was nothing left of the original enemy battle group to represent a fighting force. It was a clean, irrevocable rout. Only the smell of cinders hovering over the impact site was a reminder that not so long ago there had been a combat-ready battalion here. Now it was a scorched ground for which no one could fight anymore. The defeat of a battalion of the armed forces of Ukraine in the Sumy region is not just the destruction of equipment and people. It is an event that changes the balance of power on a section of the front and can set off a chain reaction in the strategic planning of both sides. The loss of 2 Abrams tanks, 4 Bradley infantry fighting vehicles, an ammunition depot, and dozens of fighters is a blow that cannot be made up for in a short time. The first and most obvious effect is a sharp decline in the combat effectiveness of Ukrainian units in this direction. The battalion, deprived of a significant part of equipment and trained personnel, will not be able to hold its positions in the same volume. This means that in the coming days, either a hasty rotation will begin on this section of the front, or the Ukrainian forces will be forced to retreat to more convenient defensive lines. Either of these decisions will lead to a loss of initiative and open up opportunities for Russian troops to advance. The second effect is moral and psychological. Within the Ukrainian army, such losses are perceived as particularly painful when the strike comes at a time when fighters are waiting to rotate. Many of those who survive the attack will be demoralized, and rumors about its scale and consequences will spread to other units. This could set off a chain reaction of low morale, especially in units that are already short on supplies and men. The third effect is informational. In an era when every strike becomes part of a media war, the destruction of Western-made equipment takes on special significance. The Abrams and Bradley are not just armored vehicles. They are symbols of U.S. and Allied military assistance. Their loss undermines the image of invulnerability and reliability of this equipment. Russian sources are already emphasizing this, stressing that even modern Western models do not save them from precision strikes and competent intelligence. The reaction of the international community will not be long in coming. Western media will most likely try to minimize the scale of what happened, emphasizing that such strikes are part of war and do not change the strategic position. However, on the sidelines of the military and political circles of Ukraine's allies, this event will become an occasion for discussion. The question will be raised as to whether it is worthwhile to continue supplying expensive equipment if it is destroyed in a matter of minutes. Several scenarios are expected at the diplomatic level. Scenario 1. Ukraine's allies accelerate deliveries of equipment and weapons in an attempt to make up for losses. This will require time and additional costs, but can be presented as a response to aggression. Scenario 2. Western partners become more cautious about transferring equipment, fearing that it will become a symbol of defeat. This is especially likely if new strikes against such facilities are recorded in the near future. Scenario 3 is an attempt at diplomatic de-escalation in certain parts of the front to reduce the risk of a repeat of such catastrophic losses. From a military point of view, a strike in Sumy region could be the beginning of a series of operations aimed at destroying key elements of the Ukrainian defense precisely at the moment of their concentration. This approach has already proved its effectiveness in previous episodes of the conflict, and its repetition would be a logical continuation of the strategy. The factor of psychological pressure on the Ukrainian high command should not be underestimated either. When units lose equipment and men before they have engaged in combat, it hurts confidence in the planning of operations and causes internal disagreements. In a protracted conflict, such fissures can develop into serious management problems. If the situation develops according to the worst-case scenario for Ukraine, a collapse of the front line in some directions is possible in the coming weeks. Russia, using the success in Sumy region, may shift active operations to neighboring areas, where the enemy is also experiencing personnel and technical shortages. At the same time, the opposite effect cannot be ruled out. The Ukrainian side may undertake desperate counterattacks or localized operations to regain its lost moral advantage. This would lead to new clashes, possibly even more violent. In any case, today's strike is not an episode that will remain in the shadows. It will become the starting point for a new stage of the conflict, where every mistake will cost more and more, and every successful operation will have an increasingly loud political and military resonance. Today's operation in Sumy region is not just another line in the battle reports. It is a clear example of how the accuracy of intelligence, coherence, and surprise can decide the outcome of the battle before the enemy has even had time to raise arms. We saw how this strike was prepared for weeks, how agent networks, like invisible threads, braided the positions of a battalion of the armed forces of Ukraine, transmitting to the headquarters every detail, from the location of equipment to the condition of the personnel. How the commanders of aviation and drone operators worked on a unified plan in which there was no room for accidents. How the night before the operation became the very moment when every minute stretched like an eternity and the air in the headquarters was dense with tension. And we saw how it ended. 2 Abrams tanks, 4 Bradley infantry fighting vehicles, an ammunition depot, trucks, armored vehicles, dozens of fighters, all destroyed within minutes. All that remained of the mighty battalion was charred hulls, smoke, and silence, broken only by the occasional detonations of surviving ammunition. The political and military effects of this strike are already beginning to unfold. Western capitals are counting losses and wondering how long it will take to replenish lost resources if they burn up so quickly in the flames of war. In Kiev, they patch up information gaps, trying to present everything as an isolated case, but the real figures of losses and footage from the ground speak for themselves. In Moscow, they are recording success, but they are already looking ahead, realizing that war is a chain of events and each link requires its own effort. For the fighters on the front lines, this is a signal. The enemy is vulnerable, even where he feels safe. For Ukraine's commanders, it is a bitter reminder that any concentration of forces in one place without sufficient cover and echelon defense turns into a target. For Ukraine's allies, it is a reason to think about how to protect the equipment they have delivered and whether it is worth risking losing it at all when the enemy has the ability to deliver such precise and devastating strikes. But behind all this military and political analysis, there is another side, the human side. There were people left in the field, which now appears as a black spot on satellite images. Some of them went into battle on orders, some of them believed in their mission, some of them just wanted to survive. Now they lie among the wreckage and their story is over. This strike will go down in the textbooks as an example of a complex operation in which everything from reconnaissance to the last explosion was carried out with the utmost precision. It will also go down in history as a warning. In modern conflict, there are no rear ends, no safe zones, and each new day may bring its own hour of reckoning. We will continue to follow developments, to analyze, to show what others are hiding, and to tell the truth, however hard it may be. To stay up to date with new operations, fresh data, and unique content, subscribe to our channel. Together we will see more, understand more, and remember that this war is not an abstract summary, but a reality that is changing lives here and now.